I've got a full life. And yet somehow I'm able to carve time out in my life for reading, for comprehension. The reason I'm able to do that is because I exited the matrix. I stopped doom scrolling. I very strictly monitor my consumption of entertainment. I don't play video games in my house. Sorry, men, if that's really what you want to do, you got to fix the problem. You want to read more? That's where it starts.
You're a man living in the modern world in a time when men and manhood are not what they once were. You live life on your own terms. You're self-sufficient. You think for yourself and you march to the beat of your own drum. When life knocks you down, you get back up because in your gut, you know that's what men do. You're a badass and a warrior. And on the days when you forget, we are here to remind you who you really are.
Welcome to the Sovereign Men podcast, where we aim to make men masculine again. I'm your man, Nikki Ballou, and I have a very special, erudite, and brilliant guest today, Jesan Sorrells. Welcome to the show, brother.
How you doing, Nikki? It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. I'm blessed and I'm grateful. You know, I wanted to bring you on the show because you're a man who reads. And in this day and age, not a lot of men read very much anymore. And I want to inspire men, encourage men, challenge men to be more like you and to start reading. I'd really love for you to talk to us about your journey as a reader. What had you become a reader? Why do you still continue to read? And why do you have a podcast that's all about conversations surrounding the great books of Western civilization?
Well, once again, thank you, Nikki, for having me on the show. You've asked me a lot of different things in that series of questions there. So let me see if I can knock some of these down. My journey as a reader started very young. I read banged through my first Spider-Man comic that actually my father gave me, probably when I was about 6 years old. And then from there, I leapt right into Hemingway and Steinbeck. I think the first book I read was Of Mice and Men, and I remember crying at the end when Lenny died. And then moved right from there into things like The Sun Also Rises and a lot of other heavier books. And part of the reason for that was I understood at a very young age, and this was probably around 6, 7, 8 years old, that once I could read a book, the whole plethora, the whole vista of things began to open to me. So I was probably already oriented towards reading. My grandmother had a master's degree in teaching. My father was going to school for journalism at the time. My mother was going to law school at the time. We had a household that had books in it, and we were bibliophiles. We are bibliophiles, and I'm raising my children to be bibliophiles. Fast forward a few years, you ask, how did I continue on? Well, I graduated high school in the mid-90s before video games were as big a distraction as they are now. Matter of fact, I often say to my kids, if I had the video games now, back in the 1990s that you have, I probably would have never left my room. My mother was not a person, nor was my stepfather, but my parents were not people who were said, you can go have a TV in your room and you can go squirrel in there and you can go hang out and do whatever it is you're going to do. I also grew up in a time before cell phones and social media distractions. So I had books. Now that doesn't mean that I was weak or ill fit. I got out there, I got after it. I got into fist fights when I was a teenager. I was a brawler between like 13 and 18. So I wasn't no Wilton Violet, right? I wasn't just, reading a book and just hanging out and living a life of the mind. I've always been a person who combines the intellect with action and put those two things together, and been seeking spaces where I can best not only articulate ideas, but also walk out actions. Then you asked about the podcast. So the reason I put together the podcast starting back in late 2021 was because I had an epiphany of an idea. And the epiphany was, coming out of COVID that business books had really failed us. Matter of fact, most business books were saying the exact same thing, just in regurgitated form over and over again. And we weren't actually getting to the core of the issue of the challenges that leaders face inside of organizations. And the core could be found maybe not in yet another business book by yet another business book writer with a regurgitated, hybridized idea, but maybe they could be found in books that had existed long before business books. And so I began to go back into the books of my childhood. I began to go back into books that I had read once and maybe put down, or even books I'd never touched. And I began to build the podcast.
It's interesting what you have to say about business books. I agree with you. Most business books are complete trash. I can't stand reading them. I have a bunch of them. I can't stand reading them. And I've read a whole lot of them in my lifetime, but they just don't grab me anymore. And it's because the message is sterile, it's stale, and it's fake. While
we're aiming at, with these business books, we're aiming at the lowest common denominator reader. And shouldn't we be elevating people? Shouldn't we be elevating our leaders?
Yeah. Now, I've written a few business books, and I like to think my books are different. But nonetheless, one of the things I did with one of my business books is I wrote it in the form of a fable. I didn't even write it like a business book. I wrote it like a story. That made it so much more interesting, right?
Yeah.
From my point of view. And on top of that, the books I enjoy reading the most are good fiction. There's something powerful in a story. And if you're a man, listen to this podcast, and you're a seeker, you're the kind of man who's looking to grow, looking to get better, here's what you want to do, okay? You want to find a bunch of really good fiction books. You want to read them because those fiction books are going to teach you lessons that you won't learn in any goddamn business book. They're going to teach you about life. They're going to teach you about yourself. A brilliant writer of fiction can open you up, as you said, to a whole new vista, whole new world you didn't even know existed, and can make you better, stronger, smarter. And that's what I love about reading fiction. And I don't read highbrow fiction. I read middlebrow and lowbrow fiction because those books are better written and they're easier to access and easier to read. When you and I first met, I told you I love Mickey Spillane. Mickey Spillane is a great writer, and his books have similar themes, but all the themes are about the primacy of the individual, standing up for what's right, standing against what's wrong, and believing in and loving people, and in particular, the people that you are close to, your family, your friends, your significant other. What's there not to like about books written along those themes? Right?
Right, exactly. Look, if you are a person who likes Mickey Spillane, if you like Nikki here, if you're a person who resonates with Tom Clancy, if you're a person who resonates with Jack Carr, if you're a person who resonates with Stephen King, early Stephen King, maybe not later Stephen King, but if you're a person who resonates with what would be called in the traditional book publishing world popular authors, popular fiction, look, I have nothing to say against popular fiction. I really don't. Now, with that being said, I will say I struggle going into Barnes and Noble and looking at all the popular fiction that has been published these days and realizing tragically that most of it is for women and children, and it is not for grown men.
Nope, not at all.
And this observation drives my wife absolutely crazy.
But you're right.
But it's true. And then I have to go to the back of the store to, quite frankly, the classics, quite frankly, to modernist works. You asked about my show. We typically don't read anything on the show that was published after 1970. That's our cutoff, right? And the reason why is because the field of publishing, just like the fields of academia and media and even nowadays sports, well, it has been taken over and has been moved in the direction of appealing to women and children. And what is a grown man to find in books written after the 1970s? Well, you're going to find defenstrated masculinity. You're going to find LGBTQ themes. Now, those may be all fine and well and good for those people who are in those demographics. But if you're looking for something that's masculine, if you're looking for masculine communication styles and masculine temperaments, you're not going to find a lot of that in books written after the 1970s, at least in my opinion, that are in the popular fiction space. Once again, and I know I mentioned Stephen King, early Stephen King, not late Stephen King. And there will be people who will nitpick on this, but I will tell you, I have gotten an understanding of masculinity from The Sun Also Rises, from Jack London, from Call of the Wild. I've gotten an understanding of masculinity from Victor Hugo and Les Miserables.
Amazing. Victor Hugo is a stud, man.
A stud. I've gotten understandings of masculinity from G.K. Chesterton. And interestingly enough, I've also gotten understandings of masculinity from Francis Bacon and from Shakespeare and from, I'm going to name a female author here that everybody knows, Jane Austen. Okay.
Great.
We live in a time where men and women both have more access to more information and knowledge about each other than ever before in human history. And yet we know less about each other than at any point in time in human history.
Well, look, there's a reason for that. Okay.
Well, of course there is.
There's a reason for that. This didn't happen by accident. So in 1917, a very terrible calamity befell the human race. Mm-hmm. The first communist government was installed in Russia. They murdered the Tsar and his family, and they installed a communist government whose objective was to turn the entire world communist. One world communist government. That was Marxism-Leninism. So Marx was not about turning the whole world communist, but Lenin absolutely was. He was a revolutionary. Mm-hmm. Then he decided that he was going to do this by sending provocateurs, agents provocateur, into the West, in particular the United States, using the very openness of the society against itself. And his orders were for them to penetrate the major institutions, in particular academia, media, storytelling, and start to turn these against the values of the country. And they succeeded. It took them 80, 90 years to do it, but they succeeded. And even though the Soviet Union is no more, and ironically, Russia is no longer communist, culturally, the West has become quite Marxist in many, many ways. And the backlash that resulted in the election of Donald Trump is people that believe in a traditional masculinity, people that believe in a traditional Western civilization don't want to have anything to do with this Marxist woke crap, and they're pushing back. That's what's happened. And I agree with you. The publishing industry has been infiltrated by the same woke garbage. Most of the books today are crap. I agree. But there's some good writers that are still there, that are still writing and publishing. Jack Carr, I love Jack Carr. Jack Carr is great. He's a former Navy SEAL. His characters are good. His stories are good. You know, Tom Clancy, when he was still alive and writing his own books, man, there was nobody better. Yeah, you know, the Jack Ryan books are great, but there's a lot of fantastic books that were written before 1970. I agree. I'm a huge fan of Ayn Rand, you know, woman writer, but she writes about masculinity practically better than anybody. You know, and men ought to read, but what they ought to read is they ought to read classics, and they ought to read books that are written for men. The reason men don't read today, I agree with you, is because the books aren't written for them.
Well, when you think about a book like, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is going to be coming out in July, right? And he's getting a lot of backlash for the casting and for all that, right? And I'm not going to get into that. What I'm going to say is this. If you don't like what Christopher Nolan, if you don't like the translation that Christopher Nolan used to build the script for the Odyssey, right? If you don't like that, and you don't like what that translator is trying to do with the Odyssey's been around for, good Lord, 2,500 years, something like that. go find a translation from the 19th century. Matter of fact, if you were to visit my home, on my bedside table right now, I have a Scribner and Sons translation of the Odyssey from 1953 that I'm working my way through just to refamiliarize myself with the story. Very masculine themes, very masculine language, very masculine coded communication. So all of this stuff is just laying around for us. You don't have to surrender to the woke. You don't have to surrender to a Marxist worldview. There's no law that says you have to bend the knee. We just surrender because we don't want to either do the work of actually going out and finding the alternatives, or even worse, we want to do the work, but we don't quite know what the questions are we should be asking. We don't quite know the direction we should be going in. And we don't have the internal confidence to judge and to aggregate and to curate. The other thing we'll legitimately say as men, and this is a legitimate thing. And by the way, I've got 4 kids. I've run businesses. I've worked for other people. I've had side projects, hobbies. I do jujitsu. I've got a full life. And yet somehow I'm able to carve time out in my day. I'm able to carve time out in my life for reading, for comprehension. And we talked about this in a different sort of context, but I'll say it early now. The reason I'm able to do that is because I exited the matrix. I stopped doom scrolling. I don't watch nearly as much Netflix. I very strictly monitor my consumption of entertainment. I don't play video games in my house. Sorry, men, if that's really what you want to do, you got to really upend your house. If you're walking into your house and the cable TV is on, blasting 24/7, so you don't have to have silence, so your wife doesn't ask you some question, or your girlfriend doesn't ask you something that you can't figure out the answer to, or your kids don't bother you, you got to fix the problem. You want to read more? That's where it starts.
Wholeheartedly agree. Wholeheartedly agree. I'm not going to watch Christopher Nolan's interpretation of the Odyssey. I think it's ridiculous that he's done what he's done. And I also think that as men, we need to surround ourselves with other men, and masculine coded conversation will not happen in society as a whole right now. It only happens in masculine only spaces. One of the reasons I run Sovereign Man and I do this podcast is because I want to have straight masculine conversations with other men. This weekend, we went to a men's overnight retreat. There were 9 men there. It was fantastic. We built a fire. We had great conversations. We cooked and made meals together. We laughed. We joked. We had fun. Men don't have this today. And one of the reasons I do what I do is because I want to encourage men to band together with other men. And
so let me ask you a question,
really
Nikki.
Important.
Let me ask you a question here. I'm going to turn the tables a little bit on you on your own show. I'm going to ask you a question here. Why do you think more men don't set up these kinds of things, these kinds of circles? Why aren't men who can see the problem? And by the way, if you get 3 or 4 men together, we'll all joke about it and we know what the problem is. But why is it that none of us are doing anything to, or not anything? Why is it that so few of us, there we go, are taking action to create these kinds of spaces? Why do you think that is?
They don't want the blowback. They don't want to deal with the blowback.
Okay.
That's the bottom line. They don't want to deal with the blowback. But a lot of these men, once they find out these kinds of spaces exist and they experience them, they want to be in them. The 9 men that were at this overnight retreat can't wait to get to another one. And I got my gun license here in Canada.
Ooh.
And which is a lot harder to do than it is in the US. I don't think you actually need a gun license, because your Second Amendment is a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful. Well, as Dave Chappelle once infamously said, I gotta put this in here. This plug for Dave. He did infamously say one time that Second Amendment is there in case that First Amendment don't work out.
Yeah.
that's why we got this. That's why we got the Second Amendment. Go ahead.
It's a beautiful thing. It's one of the greatest things ever created, the Second Amendment. And I'm excited to go shooting with my buds. You know what I'm saying? Go shooting
Mm-hmm.
with my buds. Like there's gun ranges. You can rent guns there. You have your own gun. If you have a gun license, you can go in there. You can do some shooting, man. That's masculine shit. You know, you were in one of my meetings. You saw how we
Mm-hmm.
talk to each other. We don't
Yep.
treat each other like dainty wallflowers that are about to crumble if you speak to them harshly.
Right.
You know, we treat you like you're a man. And if you're a man who can't handle that, well, we're going to keep talking to you that way until you either can handle it or you leave. And both of those are good as far as we're concerned.
Well, we also have challenges with, and I know you've probably talked about this on your show before, um, the line of succession, right, from fathers to sons, the traditions that would tell sons they have graduated to becoming men. We've broken those traditions in the West. They've been broken for quite some time.
Yeah.
Men are optimized ever since World War II. The man in the gray flannel suit, men have been optimized for industry and for work, not just at a philosophical level, but also a social level. I mean, the first great break came when the first generation of men came out of World War II and went right into the suburbs. Those were men who had been raised on farms. Those were men who understood what it was to be men, but they could not. Their first great spiritual battle was the battle of how to get manhood from what was called the silent generation at that point and the World War II generation, how to get manhood from there to the baby boomers. And that was the first great break in the chain where that did not get transferred down. Now, the baby boomers had just enough of it left to keep masculinity sort of kind of maybe on life support, but they didn't have enough to pass on to my generation, your generation, the Gen Xers, right? And we didn't have enough because our generation was small to pass along to the millennials. And now we're in a situation where men in their 20s and 30s are in a state of arrested development, a state of infantilization, and looking, searching desperately for tools that will help them raise up out of that infantilization. And I fundamentally believe the books can do this. I fundamentally believe that reading can do this. Now, Andrew Tate, infamously enough, has gone on and on about how people, but he's like one of those wrong clocks that, is eventually right at least once a day.
There's a lot that he says that's fucked up, but yeah, he does make one or two good points.
And one of the points he makes is that if you're constantly reading, constantly consuming, but you're not acting, then you're no good. And he's fundamentally correct. So if I'm reading the Odyssey and I'm looking at that entire sequence in the beginning where Telemachus and Penelope are dealing with the suitors in the house, I should be thinking, I should be making notes. I should be looking at this situation and I should be saying, how does this resemble how I was raised? How does this resemble what's going on in my house? What are the things that this text is telling me that I can correct? Because I'm Odysseus in this text. If you're a grown man with kids in your house and a wife, if you're a grown man with a girlfriend and obligations, you're either down the path to being Odysseus or you are Odysseus. How are you going to take from this text? What are you going to take that's actually applicable? What actions are you going to take? And you're the only one that can apply that to your life. And then you can get into a group of men and you can start, as it says in the Bible, sharpening other iron, right? You can begin to push these ideas and to talk about them and to challenge them. C.S. Lewis did this with Tolkien back in the day. G.K. Chesterton did this with H.G. Wells, who we fundamentally disagreed with, because Wells was a socialist and Chesterton was not, and they sparred with each other. They shot barbs at each other, but they did it in person. They didn't do it over Twitter. Twitter, social media, this is not a substitute for getting in person with men, as Nikki has demonstrated. But the books are the beginning. They're the door. They're the door. They're the door that has to open. But the only way you can do that is by putting down other things.
Amen. Men want in person. Men want in person. One of the men at this overnight retreat said that the best thing he got from the overnight retreat was being in person with other men.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of other men who said they got a lot of other powerful, valuable things. But that stood out for me out of everything everyone said, because I agree with them. The best thing about that overnight is that we were together with other men in person. Yeah. So, hey, Sam, my man, what are 10 books every man should read and why?
Ooh,
Lightning round, baby. Lightning round.
lightning round. Wow. 10 books every man should read and why. Okay. Probably the number one book on that list should be the Bible. You should absolutely read the Bible, whether you believe in a transcendent God or not, whether you believe in Jesus or not, whether you think you know the story or not. The Bible should be number one on that list. It is the foundational book of Western civilization. And if you want to protect your civilization, and if you want to know what it actually stands for, starting with the family first, and then moving out into concentric circles to other areas in our lives. If you want to know what's wrong with our world, read the Bible. And there's no excuse. Bibles are everywhere. They sell 80 million of them a year. It's the best-selling book in the history of humanity. Just go get it.
Yeah.
Then after you've read the Bible, that's number one. Then number two, I would say is, we've already talked about this, is the Iliad and the Odyssey. You should read both of those back to back. The Iliad comes before the Odyssey, but either way, read both of those. They are the foundational text of Greek thinking, which rapidly and actively informs what we do here. Then you should move into some of the Greek plays, the plays of Sophocles, the Orestia. These plays are interesting. They're all built off of Iliad, and they're built off of the Odyssey. They're built off that core idea, and then they take it and they go in other places. I'd recommend all of those. That'd be 4 and 5. Then I'm going to move you ahead a few hundred years, and I'm going to recommend Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. Now, Othello's good. Macbeth is good. All of Shakespeare's plays are good. But Julius Caesar, you want to know what it's about being a man in charge? There's a great scene in that play where his wife Calpurnia is trying to get Caesar to not go to the Senate because she knows he's about to be killed, or she suspects that something's about to happen to him. She's had a dream. And he looks at her and he says, "Always, everywhere I am Caesar." And he goes out and he's slain. "I'm always a man everywhere, even unto my death. Why are we fooling around? If you don't understand that, that's because you're not a man. You don't understand what it means to be a man." That would be number 6 on my list, would be Julius Caesar. Then moving forward a few more years, I would read Candide by Voltaire. Now, Voltaire was an atheist, and Voltaire had a problem with the Catholic Church, and Voltaire came along at a time when revolutionary fervor was beginning to build in France, and he was a skeptic. But Candide is probably one of the better eviscerations in fiction of all of the skepticism that has surrounded people and that has surrounded humanity in the course of civilization. I would definitely recommend that one. That'd be number 7. Now we're going to do 8, 9, and 10. Okay. So number 8, I would strongly recommend Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ by Lew Wallace. If you don't know who Lewis Wallace is, you need to go back and read your American history. Ben-Hur was probably the greatest selling Christian novel of all time. It made Lew Wallace a ton of money, the equivalent of $210,000 a year in royalties back in the 1880s. We're actually going to be covering this book on our podcast coming up in June. And it is Lew. And if you go and look at the life of Lew Wallace and who he actually was, the man was a Union general. The man was at Shiloh. The man was a diplomat. He was a governor of the New Mexico Territory, if I remember correctly. All kinds of things about him. He was a generalist in a world where specialization hadn't come around yet, and he was a romantic, which means he cared very much about not only writing, but he cared about the power of creativity and the power of art. Pick up Ben-Hur. Then number 9, you're going to want to read Ernest Hemingway, and you're going to want to pick up The Sun Also Rises. The Sun Also Rises is probably the best example of masculine communication and masculine behavior in a post-World War I context. World War I was probably the most tragic war that ever occurred to the European civilization. And it created the situation. It created the knock-on effects. Nikki was talking about communism. Communism would not have been as effective in Russia if World War I hadn't happened.
No,
it wouldn't have worked.
not at all.
Not at all. You also wouldn't have had the Spanish influenza. You also would not have had World War II, which everybody knows. Yeah. I mean,
World War everybody knows was the start of the death of Western civilization in Europe.
Oh, yeah. And it really put Western civilization across the globe back on its heels. And we've never really fully recovered from that. Every single pathology that we suffer from in the West came out of World War I. And we still haven't dealt with that war successfully.
No.
Well, guess what? One of the writers that we've covered on our show that was struggling to get his around world was Ernest Hemingway. He couldn't really deal with what he had seen and experienced as an ambulance driver, part of the lost generation in Paris. But read The Sun Also Rises. It's got bullfights. It's got wine in the afternoon in Spain. And it's got the problems that you have when a man tries to communicate with a woman and he can't. Sun Also Rises should be on your list. And then finally, I'm going to give you a book that was turned into a Western. And Nick and I have talked about this a little bit on our show, but we covered it on our show as well. My final book, my top 10 final book would be True Grit by Charles Portis, a book that was made famous by John Wayne's portrayal in the 1960s. But the book itself is an amazing little tome. Charles Portis, by the way, is a writer, lived out the writer's dream. He went and became a newspaper columnist, told everybody at the newspaper column that he was going to go off and write a book, and he did, and he became famous. And he stayed in Arkansas for the vast majority of his life. Almost no one knew that he was a great writer. And True Grit was his greatest book. The character Maddie Ross, she is rock-ribbed, she is traditional, she is moral, and she has masculine temperament coming out of that 16, 17-year-old girl. She's handling herself in such a way that she can get other men not to work for her, but to help her advance her mission. And this is an example of true leadership without men being reduced to niggling nubs, as Tony Soprano might say.
This is a great list.
Was it 10 books?
Yeah, 10 books. I mean, the Bible, funny you should mention that. I just finished 2 Timothy, and I've got about another 75 pages to go before I finish my Bible. It's the first time I'll have read it from cover to cover. Never read the Iliad and the Odyssey. You said the number 4 and 5 were Sophocles and the Orestia?
Yes, Orestia. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Or you could pick any of the other Greek plays. You could pick plays by Aristophanes. You can pick I'm thinking of any of those plays. Any of the Greek plays in there would be good. Antigone, any of those would be good.
I never read Julius Caesar. I read a bunch of other of Shakespeare's works in high school. Mm-hmm. I haven't read Candide. I haven't read Ben-Hur. I don't think I've read The Sun Also Rises, but I have read True Grit. Great book. Spectacular book. So I'm going to go get the rest of these books and read them. I think that's a fantastic thing to do.
Can I say something else? One more thing about the Bible. So I'm actually in my off year. So once every odd year for the last, 15 years, I've gone through the Bible in a year. And and so every time I do that, I find more in there. Every time I do that exercise, I take more notes, and my prayer life becomes richer, and my family life becomes better. How I think about who I am and my identity becomes better. My discipline becomes better. In my off years, like this is an off year, I'm a little bit quite frankly, off, right? And don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm not reading the Bible, but it's not my focus, right? It's not where I have my laser focus because I'm letting things lay fallow right now.
Sure.
One of the interesting things, by the way, that I've noted, though, in this fallow year is that the book of Judges maps very nicely onto what has happened in America over the last 50 years. So if you go back to the book of Judges, and you read that, you'll sort of begin to have an understanding, not only at a spiritual level, but also a psychological and an emotional level of what exactly it is that's going on in the United States, because the parallels to us and Israel at that time are tremendous.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to the book of Judges. I'm not quite there yet. So I'm putting together some of my books, and they're very different from your books right now, and I'm doing it on the fly. So my number one book that's had the biggest impact on me is a novel written in 1974 called The Eagle Has Landed by Jack Higgins. In 1974, I read the book in 1975. I was 8 years old. That book, I've read it so many times. It blew me away because it's a fictional story of a German paratrooper unit under the command of a German colonel, Kurt Steiner, who was anti-Nazi, who was given an assignment to go and kidnap or kill Winston Churchill in
Awesome.
the countryside. And I want to have it be a spoiler alert, but the integrity of this man, the honor that he held, and the unbelievably powerful character who had a code that he lived by, right and wrong, caused him to give up the chance to succeed in his mission without any casualties to his own men. And I looked at it and went to myself, if he hadn't taken this one step, and his men who had been his men and trained by him and inspired by him hadn't taken that step, because I don't want to give it away because it's such a powerful part of the story. I read it to go through that again and again and again because it made me glad to be a man. Every time I read it, I go, yeah, this is what men are like. This is what it's about. That's my number one book on the list. Number 2, 3, and 4 are all by the same author. They're The Fountainhead, Anthem, and Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. I don't know if you've ever read Ayn Rand's books, but I think she is perhaps the greatest novelist that I've ever read. And her themes all extol the strong, masculine, individual man. You know, very powerful, very, very powerful. All of those books. The next two are The Cardinal of the Kremlin and The Hunt for Red October, both written by Tom Clancy. And these are early Tom Clancy books. And my God, is Clancy ever a phenomenal writer? And the characters he created there, Jack Ryan, were unbelievably masculine, unbelievably patriotic, and all about right and wrong. You know, really, really powerful stuff. The character in The Cardinal of the Kremlin is a Russian colonel who fought in World War II. And again, this was a man that did the right thing according to his code at great personal cost to himself. And I just fucking admire the fuck out of men like that. You know, absolutely love reading about them. The 7th book on my list is The White House Years by Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was the national security advisor and Secretary of State to probably the smartest man to ever become president of the United States, Richard Nixon. And this book is brilliant in terms of showing how the Nixon White House engaged in its foreign policy with the Soviet Union. And it's so good, so fabulous. I absolutely love this book. Um, I haven't fully read the Bible, but I'm going to put it on the list. I'm going to put it on the list for all the reasons you said.
Mhm.
I'll be done with it very soon. My ninth book will be a biography, an autobiography, actually, the autobiography of President Reagan, An American Life. I love Ronald Reagan. He is my favorite president, my favorite leader.
Mhm.
Quintessential, awesome, masculine, American, American man. just absolutely freaking brilliant. And the 10th book on my list is The 12th Angel. It's written by Og Mandino. In fact, I could have probably put Og Mandino on this list more than once, but Og Mandino started his career as a writer in the 60s. He wrote a very famous book called The Greatest Salesman in the World that, in a very biblical way, told a powerful parable of success based in biblical times. But I don't think that's his best book, even though it's his best-selling book, his first book and his best-selling book. The 12th Angel is his best book.
Mhm.
And the 12th Angel has to be read to be believed, but it is the story of a man who moved his family to to New Hampshire.
Mhm.
He was a high-flying business executive. Then something very tragic happens, and again, I don't want to give away the plot. And he's on the verge of giving up and wanting to die, and he's introduced to the 12th Angel. And it's a brilliant book. It's a beautiful book. It makes me cry just thinking about it. So
All of the books that you've mentioned, and I wrote down all of them. I'm going to pick up The Eagle Has Landed. Obviously, I have seen the movie The Hunt for Red October. I think I read the book. There's a bell ringing in the back of my head. I think I might have read the book years ago, probably when I was in my late teens, early 20s. The Cardinal of the Kremlin. I believe I started that and I didn't finish it, so I need to go back and restart that again. The White House Years, the autobiography of Ronald Reagan, The 12th Angel, and of course, all of Ayn Rand's books. There's a theme that runs through your selection, just like there's a theme that runs through mine. And tell me if I've caught the theme.
sure.
You value books that are about, you value themes that focus around honor, a code, success, commitment, clear communication, sacrifice, loyalty. Am I picking up on the theme correctly?
100%.
Why is it then? Not why. What are the things? What question is better than a why question? What are the things that we can learn as men? Not even learn. What are the things we can apply as men to our daily lives from these books? Because this is one of the things I'm challenged by every time I bring a book to my audience, right? I challenge myself internally to think about when I bring Ben-Hur, or when I bring a Eudora Welty book, or when I bring a book by Catherine Ann Porter, or when I bring a book, when I bring Shakespeare. What are the ways that the themes from this book or this play or this poem, what are the things that can be applied to people's real lived lives, where people really live? And I'm constantly churning on that, trying to make this real for folks, right? So it's not intellectual pie in the sky, so that it's tied to action, so that we can actually move this whole Western civilization experiment forward, right? Just an inch of a step at a time. What are the things that people can get from, that men can get from these books that you've selected?
I think every man ought to understand what is it that makes a man a man. And the first thing is his word, his honor, his integrity, the things he stands for. If you read these books and they inspire you to be a man that's that sort of man, that's a beautiful thing. That's first and foremost. And I think the right sort of man's loyal. Right sort of man will sacrifice. In the Bible it says, a man has no greater love and to lay down his life for his brother.
Mhm.
That speaks to my core, man. Speaks to my very core. And I also think a man's job is to provide. So success is very important. To provide for yourself, for your family, for the world, really. And the kind of man that does that is a committed man. A committed man, you know.
These are the things that sort of like remember Jack Nicholson's character in A Few Good Men. These are things that have become punchlines to people who, deep down in places they don't want to talk about at cocktail parties, need and want men that exhibit these kinds of traits. But they only want them on their terms. They want them tamed when they want them tamed. But when they want to release them out of the cage, they want them to go do bad things and then go right back into the cage. And this is the tension that has been exposed in the last, I would say, really sharply in the last 25 years. This is the tension that men are living in. So, and this is what happens when, like I said, the great chain of being going all the way back is broken, when men don't have other men to tell them how to balance this tension. And I'm going to make this personal. So my parents divorced when I was 12 for a whole variety of reasons. I didn't see my father again after that. My mother remarried to a very blue collar guy, my stepfather. She was married to him actually longer than she was married to my father, which is interesting. He just died last year. This was a guy who broke his back, right? Broke his body laying concrete in Louisiana. Not a well-educated man, not a reader, not by any stretch of the imagination. Not stupid, but not a reader, right? Not that kind of guy. And the challenges I had with my stepfather and the challenges I had with my father, I had to figure out in the course of my 20s and 30s how to integrate all of that stuff, how to integrate all of that, those emotions, all of those ideas, all of those thoughts, how to put them in the appropriate boxes and then construct a model of masculinity for my sons. I had to commit to doing things that my father didn't do and commit to being present for my kids in ways, both my sons and my daughters, in ways that my father or my stepfather were not for me. I'm not unusual. There's a lot of men who've had to reconstruct their own masculinity with no outside help.
Yeah.
The books help. The books help.
They do.
They're not the whole thing. They're not the whole thing, but they are something. So when I read the Hakagure, right, or when which is a book about the Bushido Code, right? It's the basis for the movie Ghost Dog. That I can't remember the actor's name, Frederick. Oh, it'll come to me in a minute. Ghost Dog, The Way of the Samurai. Anyway, it's based on the book The Hakagure, and it's a book about Bushido. The book about the code of honor, right? Describes what the Bushido Code is. When I read that book first, when I was probably 22 or 23, I was at a transitional moment in my life, right? 9/11 had just happened. I was making some decisions about my life and what I was going to do and where I was going to go and who I was going to be. And this book was a tiny brick that went into that wall. Now, that brick wasn't disconnected from the brick that my father had put in a wall, where he told me years ago that, and Nikki, you actually said a variation of this today, a man does what he says he's going to do. So you don't commit, you don't make promises unless you can keep them. So you don't make promises, period, unless you can keep them. That, and then the code, and now I got to find the gaps, right? I got to figure out where this fits. I got to figure out how this works. How do those two things come together? And outside of other men, it becomes very hard to do that. You can do it if you have the internal will. But outside of other men, it becomes very hard to do this. And so I sought out male-only spaces. This is why I got into the martial arts. This is why I played rugby for many years. This is why I got into those spaces, because guess what? That's where you discover how to close those gaps between what you read in the book and your life experience that you're walking around out here with. That's the practical thing, I think, for folks listening to us today.
It's been a great conversation, man. Spectacular. Really enjoyed it. Love the list of 10 books. I'm going to pick up all the ones I don't have and read them.
As am I. I want to get this book, The 12th Angel, in particular. I'm extremely curious about this now. You've got my antenna up.
He wrote practically all of his books with Christian themes.
Interesting. Okay.
Either overt or covert. So, his most famous book is nowhere near his best book.
Okay.
The 12th Angel is his best book, but his second best book is called The Christ Commission. And it's a story about a man who is taken back in time to the time of Christ. And he's given a commission to find out if Jesus Christ really rose from the dead. And the protagonist is skeptical that it happened.
Interesting.
It is very interesting. I'd heard about this book for 20 years, and I just said, yeah, I don't want to read it. And then one day I just said, you know what? I think I want to read it. And I read it in one sitting, 265 pages in one sitting. And I was like, wow, this is good. This is really, really good. And I started to realize how much of a committed Christian Augmendino was. I didn't know it before then. Even though I'd read all his books, I'm like, oh yeah, this dude's a Christian. But a man like him wouldn't make it in today's publishing world, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to end on a high note. I want to say this. There are a lot of good self-published, and I would encourage folks who are listening to this podcast to if you have a comment section or you have the ability to leave comments, please leave comment on the episode of what books it is that you're seeing, that you're reading, that are on your list, right? I would challenge folks to do that.
That's a great idea
today. Yeah.
Great idea.
And even include books that are in different genres. So I know that there are some men who would listen to both of our lists and would go, none of that interests me. I really like science fiction, or I really like military, or I really like political, or I really like thrillers. That's fine. I'm not being lowbrow, highbrow, whatever, middlebrow. That's not the point. The point is the kinds of books that men want to read. There's an entire back catalog in Western history where we could pull from. And if we want to read new themes and new books, I think that the future is in self-publishing. I really do think that that's where it is. So I would encourage all those folks who are listening out here, all these men who are listening out here, if you have a story inside of you, Nikki's published books, right? I've published books. If you have a story that's living inside of you, you have a book that has to get out, there's no better time than now. Even with as degraded a culture as we may live in, there's no greater time than now than to put pen to paper or pull out your computer and start typing it up and go out there and self-publish it. I'm not going to name platforms. You can figure out what those are. I'm not going to tell you how you can get paid or how you can get money for any of that. You'll figure all that out. The tools exist for anyone to publish now. And you can absolutely go out and do that. And there's a lot of men, by the way, who are doing that.
Amen.
And I'd love to see some of those suggestions in the comments below the show notes for this episode.
Amen. My man, it's been a blast. Thank you very much.
Nikki, always a great conversation with you.
Absolutely, man. And that's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to the Sovereign Man Podcast. If you're ready to take charge of your life and become the man you've always wanted to be, we invite you to join the movement at sovereignman.ca.